The small boats causing a huge wave in British politics. Today, British Home Secretary Suella Braverman announced plans for the illegal migration bill, the government's new plan to tackle the issue of migrants entering the UK on small boats through the English Channel. The legislation will mean that migrants who enter the UK illegally will be refused asylum, banned from re-entry, and will either be sent back to their home country or, if their home country is deemed unsafe, will be moved to a third country. This third country will most likely be Rwanda, after last year the High Courts ruled that this practice did not break the UN's Refugee Convention. Braverman did note that this does push the boundaries of international law, but that something has to be done to stop the migrant crisis. In 2022, 45,000 migrants entered the UK illegally through the Channel crossing. 4 years prior, that number was only 300. But is this the right way to deal with this? Is the Conservative Party prioritising trying to win back its disillusioned right-wing support base by rushing through legislation with questionable legality, or could this plan help ease the heavily strained British public services? Is the issue surrounding illegal migration or migration in general? How should the UK deal with illegal migration?
So let's get to it. How should the UK deal with illegal migration? As always, we begin with our quickfire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick it up from there. So Phil, Dave, please take the lead.
Well, in answer to your question, how should the UK deal with illegal migration, and the word here is illegal, I would say with a very tough stance, as we should take with anything that is illegal. The way I look at it is the law is there to be observed, and frankly, for those who choose to disrespect British law from the second they arrive at the British shores is going to be no model citizen, in my humble opinion. So the way I look at it, tough stance, get on with it.
Jonathan Lees, your take?
Look, the way to deal with illegal migration is to make it legal. Nobody wants small boats, least of all the people who are actually using them. They're not using them because they want to put their lives in danger. They're using them because there are no safe and legal alternatives for them to get to Britain in order to claim asylum, which is an internationally recognised human right, and which in 76% of cases, they're actually granted. The government is not allowing safe and legal routes, and therefore it's forcing people to use these boats and therefore come here illegally.
Okay, last but not least, Mark Regev, your thoughts?
Well, from the Israeli experience, and it's interesting for me to watch what's going on in Britain because it's what we went through a few years ago. I remember the discussions in the Israeli government that I participated in. You have to stop it. If you don't stop it, it just becomes a wave, and you look at the numbers in Britain like the numbers were in Israel. If you don't stop it, it doesn't rise step by step. It rises exponentially.
Okay, and on that note, let's please feel free to interact from this point onwards. And I do want us to begin our conversation by circling back to the point Phil Dave made at the opening of his opening remarks. Is it really about illegal migration, or are we talking about migration in general? Or in other words, is it resources, is it the law, or is it simply ideology, Jonathan?
I think it's probably a mix of all three. In the British people's minds, there's something interesting going on here. Because actually, if you look at the polling, people in Britain are much less concerned about migration than they used to be. You know, a few years ago, it was people's top concern going into elections. And now, I think after Brexit, it's become far less of an issue. So, but there is still a conflation in people's minds between migration and irregular migration. And I don't like to use the term illegal migration because, for the reasons I've said, if it's illegal, then make it legal. So it's about irregular people entering.
We should actually tell the truth.
Phil, I wouldn't expect you to have a helpful intervention, but that's part of the course. So
okay, well,
if you have a discussion about irregular
helpful intervention, Jonathan, is that I can't help but wonder where you're reading your polls from, because I hear nothing but people are fed up with migration. I think at long last, the Conservative Party are finally realising how sick the British public are of all of these small boats coming over here and basically flocking the shores.
You're just doing it, Phil. You're doing exactly the thing, Phil. You're doing exactly exactly the thing I just spoke about, which is conflating two separate issues, migration and irregular migration. If you look at the polling, and neither you or I are a psephologist, if you look at the polling, then people are not actually as concerned about regular migration as they were before.
No, I don't
agree
think they are.
that people are concerned, not everyone, but a section of the population is concerned about irregular migration. And that is in part because the right-wing media has talked up and become hysterical over the issue of the small boats. To the extent that some people will think that, there are hundreds of thousands of people arriving, in clandestine ways on boats every single day. It's actually far, far less than numbers. If you look at the overall numbers of migration to Europe, the numbers are very, very small. We're talking about some tens of thousands of people in an entire year, not some millions of people arriving every day. So this is, in the grand scheme of things,
as opposed to the left-wing media that just wants us to open the floodgates and say, hey, come on in. It doesn't matter if we don't have the infrastructure to deal with you. We'll cope with it. We'll spend millions of pounds putting up in hotels.
This is very, Phil, what you're doing right now is very helpful because you are contrasting where I'm putting across facts, so it's helpful, but not in the way you'd like it to be. Whereas I'm putting across facts, you're just kind of, smearing your opponents, sort of making, a sort of stereotyping your opponent's arguments. No one is saying.
I'm speaking for a vast majority of people who are absolutely sick to the back teeth, Jonathan, of what is actually going on. You can put it down to minuscule numbers.
Asylum is not a crime. Asylum is not a crime and never has been. Asylum is a human right, and it's incumbent upon the British government to offer safe and legal routes for people to claim asylum.
Okay. Mark Regev, you mentioned the Israeli experience here, and Braverman admitting that the bill would be pushing the boundaries of international law. But is it pushing or crossing? Israel faced a similar debate back in the day.
Correct, and we had trouble because the government would propose something and then it would be rejected by the Supreme Court, and then we'd propose something else to try to come, and we had this back and forth with the Supreme Court. At the time, I remember Gideon Saar was the Minister of Justice, and he was the Minister of the Interior, and he was very frustrated by this. Basically, what is your fundamental problem? If it's refugees who are fleeing genocide, so of course you let them in. But what do you do when you have a situation where a lot of countries like Sudan, Eritrea, so forth, where you can make one night washing dishes in Tel Aviv, or in this case in London, more than you make for the whole year in the country of source? Of course, countries like Israel, countries like the UK will be a magnet to people like that. So I'm all in favour of legal immigration. I think that's a good thing. A lot of legal immigrants come to Israel, they stay here. I myself was an immigrant to this country. My father was a refugee from the Holocaust. People who are fleeing genocide, of course, that's a different thing. But what do you do with economic immigrants? Surely you have to put checks and balances.
But
Mark,
maybe...
The whole point
is... Please, Jonathan.
Sorry, Mark, the whole point here is that the government itself, which, as you know, is not friendly to immigration, has pioneered this hostile environment for regular legal migrants as well as illegal, people who come in illegally. It's not about sort of economic migration, and I don't think economic migration is a bad thing, by the way. But the government, even by the government's own metrics, is determining that the vast majority of asylum seekers are legitimate asylum seekers, and that includes people.
Can I ask you a question? Let me ask you a question. Israel, with all our faults, and we have them, we're a democracy. None of the countries around us are democratic countries. Does that mean Israel has a legal obligation to accept the entire population of Egypt, of Syria, of Iraq, of Iran? Anyone who wants to walk in can walk in because we're the only democracy in the area. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not talking about Israel here because that's a very, very different
but let's say England. All right.
No, because you don't want to make a decent comparison,
what you were saying.
Do you?
What I'm saying, I'm saying something very simple. I'm saying that asylum is a legal right for anyone to seek and claim asylum. I'm not saying that every country has a right to grant those asylum claims, because clearly it has to fall into specific conditions. I think that it's legitimate to separate economic migration from asylum. I personally am very much in favour of economic migration. As a Jewish person in Britain, most of us Jews in Britain are descended from either economic migrants or asylum seekers, or in fact both. So, I think it would be hypocritical for me to say that we shouldn't have economic migration. But the point is that the majority of people who are claiming asylum in this country are deemed to be legitimate asylum seekers.
Can I ask you a
see,
question,
the problem
though?
is, Jonathan, you keep referring to the fact that you say that it's legitimate, it is legal for someone to claim asylum in the UK. Well, that may well be the case. Just for the record, there are many people who find it slightly abhorrent the fact that the slaughtering of animals in the name of cooking them is legal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a popular choice. What I'm trying to get at is just because something is legal, it doesn't mean that it's right. At one stage in our country's history, it was legal to hang, draw, and quarter somebody. You know, laws can be changed to suit the majority of people. If the majority of the country are fed up of something, are annoyed by something, just because you think the law is on their side, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's what everyone wants to see happen.
Well, Phil, what you're talking about is
all I keep hearing is how fed up people are of migrants coming illegally to the country. You can get a plane for cheaper than they charge for these people to come on these boats. If they were really that legitimate, why did they come on a plane?
That's exactly the point, Phil. That's exactly the point. These people are not choosing to pay thousands of pounds to people smugglers to come on unseaworthy vessels. They would much rather take legitimate vehicles of transport to the United Kingdom.
Then
the government
maybe
is not
it's a
allowing them to do
massive
that.
hint.
That's the
Maybe
whole
it is
point.
an enormous hint to say the UK can't cope. Maybe they're actually being told in some weird way, if you have to break the law to that degree, maybe the UK is not able to take that many people, and we need to be stricter, and we need to deal with this.
Horrible, pathetic argument to make that the UK, which is prides itself on offering a sanctuary, which is pride itself on offering sanctuary and safe havens people
and to clog up the money when people are in a cost of living crisis. And you think that it's pathetic that I'm standing up for the British people who pay a fortune?
You're not standing up. You're not standing up for anyone but hardcore right-wing values, and you should be ashamed of it, frankly. Because
no, I'm proud. I'm proud of my country.
Well, I'm glad that you're proud. I'm proud to be standing up for people less fortunate than myself, to have the right to have the life that I've been able to enjoy because my family was allowed into this country. That's what I'm proud of. And I bet your family came in legally. I would imagine that, unless you're saying your descendants of illegal migration, in which case that explains a lot. The law was different.
Oh, okay, of course.
You can resort to ad hominem as much as you want. It means you've lost the argument, which you always do.
No, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. What's the point? You're clearly not going to change your mind anymore.
Maybe I'll say something.
Yeah, Mark Regev, wrap it up for us.
I think it's in. I don't know if I can wrap it up because it'll never wrap up. But can I say that I think it's important to distinguish between legitimate asylum seekers and economic migrants. And one way you look at it, if you have a legitimate refugee population, you see an overall cross-section of men, women, young, old. You see families. If you see a situation where the majority of people tend to be males under 40, yes, I think you can fairly presume that it's economic migrants.
And again, there is more to speak about economic migration, yes or not, and we will be doing just that right after the break. Jonathan Lees, Phil Dave, Mark Regev, you're staying with us. Obviously, so much more to discuss. A few minutes, and we're back with the summit. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Mark Regev, Jonathan Lees, Phil Dave. Thank you so very much for staying with us. We're also, of course, staying on topic. But first, let's take a listen to British Interior Minister Suella Braverman today saying, well, if everyone is to know the risk, maybe they're maybe they wouldn't risk it. Yeah.
Knows that if you enter Britain illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Removed back to your country if it's safe, or to a safe country, a safe third country like Rwanda. And that is precisely what this bill will do. That is how we will stop the boats.
So let's get to it. Sending migrants to Rwanda is legal, but is it ethical? Where's the line between ethical and legal here? Another quick fire round and we'll pick it up from there. Jonathan, take the lead, please.
The Rwanda policy is a complete obscenity for a number of reasons. People have a right to seek the life that they want to have. That you can't simply tell people that they have no right to seek a life in Britain. They have to go to a country in the middle of Africa with a very dubious human rights record to live a life that they don't want to live. You can't do that. It's just so completely outrageous for a country to dump its problems on a developing African country that I can't even accept that Britain could do it.
Mark Regev?
Well, as a former ambassador, I know a little thing about international law. I know one of the essences or the foundations of sovereignty is you actually do control your own borders and you decide who comes in. I'm going to India on a holiday in a week and I had to get a visa, right? Because I have no right to visit India. I have to ask permission. I think that's the way it works in the world.
Oh, okay, yeah, a very clear guideline here. Phil, Dave, your take.
Well, first and foremost, I would suggest that anyone who doesn't like the idea of sending on to Rwanda is actually sort of really quite rude towards Rwanda. I was there quite recently. I happen to think it's a very nice country. So the fact that someone is having their flight paid for and being sent over whilst they are simply being processed, it is not even to say that they have to live there indefinitely, but the fact that they are simply being processed to analyse whether or not they are able to come to the UK, I would say that I can think of far worse situations to be in. And if they're fleeing persecution, hey, it's got to be better than the alternative, right?
What an absolutely despicable thing to say, honestly. First of all, it's not true because the British government is deporting people to Rwanda, not sending them to Rwanda for processing. They're deporting them. They won't have the right to come back to Britain afterwards.
Well, so they shouldn't enter illegally then.
And being so flippant about people who are seeking persecution. I just can't understand the mindset that leads you to say something like that. These people
I'll explain what the mindset is, Jonathan, happily.
We can't simply outsource our responsibilities to other countries. You can't delegate or outsource your responsibility to the country to your right. Because if we're saying that we wash our hands of the people who are desperately in need, then what's stop France doing the same, Belgium doing the same, every country doing the same, and passing the problem off to the country to its right until no country in the world is
France does it all the time. France does it to us. France does it all the time, the way that they almost encourage people to come over to the UK. So do me a favour and don't tell me that France doesn't pass off their problems, because we know they do. And if I might just add as well, the fact that former Ambassador Regev has just simply said the way international law works, that actually says that you can determine who comes into your borders or through your borders, I would say, frankly, what more do you need to know?
I never said that Britain didn't have the power over its borders. That's not what we're discussing. We're saying that people have a right to claim.
What you've been saying. You've said let's welcome them all in. What are you talking about?
No, you're just
you
lying,
said people
Phil.
have got the right to claim asylum. I'm not lying.
Because you don't have any arguments. Because you don't have any arguments.
Please, this is a discussion, not a rant. Will you let someone else talk?
At least have the intellectual honesty to represent what I say honestly.
Let someone else
I never said that we had to let everyone in.
Do you know what, Jonathan? This is completely boring now. Are you going to let someone else speak or not?
Okay.
Because if you're not, then I'll just leave you to it. Seriously, enough already. I didn't say that you are saying that you don't control about controlling, but what I'm saying to you is that if you're so determined to say that people have got the right to seek asylum wherever they are, wherever they want to, fine, let them. But if they're going to be processed accordingly, perfect. If they are going to enter illegally and not claim asylum, or at least sort of seek migration in a legal channel, then why on earth should we be so sympathetic towards that? I'm not sympathetic towards it. I have a passport. I travel to a country and I get the right paperwork before I go there.
Yeah, okay.
Because people who are fleeing persecution don't necessarily have the right visas and paperwork. That's the whole point. Otherwise, they would come here. And also,
okay,
if
but
you
they're
have a
perfectly
visa
safe in
Britain,
France.
you cannot.
They are perfectly safe in France.
If you seek a visa to come here to Britain, and the British authorities think that you're going to use that to claim asylum, they won't grant you that visa anyway. So people are forced to come here irregularly, and Britain doesn't offer any safe or legal route to do so. That's the point.
Okay, Ambassador Regev, as we've mentioned earlier in our conversation, Israel was dealing with same but different situation to an extent. What was the solution?
Well, people from coming illegally on those small boats to Britain are risking their lives in the English Channel. And you had a similar situation where you had people from Sudan and Eritrea walking up in the Sinai Peninsula, once again with people smugglers taking money and abusing them on the way, and just walking into Israel. And of course, we had laws and we're committed to treaties and so forth. Legitimate asylum seekers you have to take. The question is, what do you do to a situation where you have a large part of, let's say, Africa in this case, but not only Africa, where you have people who work very, very hard but just don't make a living. As I said, you can make more money one night washing dishes in Tel Aviv than you can in a year in a place like Eritrea. And so it's such an economic matter. How does one effectively distinguish between bona fide asylum seekers and between economic migrants? One way you can do it, of course, is to find out, are they being particularly persecuted? Another way is to ask, are they coming with their family? Why is it all, like, often we found that they were groups of young men who were obviously coming for working because they were predominantly men under the age of 40 of labour, without wives, without children. If you're in a serious persecution situation, the whole family tends to leave. We have to have in Israel, and I think Jewish people have to have a special consideration. I mean, as I said, my parents were refugees, my grandparents were refugees. We have to be, if people are really facing persecution or genocide, but that shouldn't be a free ticket for every economic migrant.
But I do want to insist on the economic migrant issue. We, the West, is seeing it as a problem, but maybe it is the solution, rather, to the workforce problems Europe is facing, the UK is facing, Israel is facing. Phil?
But surely then it should be legal if possible. I mean, it should be legal if possible.
I mean, I would say to the what you say, Ellie, about the work situation. I mean, unfortunately, that's symptomatic of a country, of a culture that has been bred for the past, I'd say, at least 20 years, where we have basically told a lot of people who are already in the West, you're too good to do certain jobs, therefore aim high and ignore everything. And I think, unfortunately, it's just symptomatic of that. So I dare say, yes, it is possible it could solve that, but I don't think it's the answer. I believe the answer is that we've got more than enough people who are out of work in this country, at the very least, who could be encouraged back into the workplace. Can I just say very quickly, I do apologize profusely for shouting, but you must understand that this is a situation and it's a subject that so many people feel so strongly about in the UK, and I'm really sorry. I understand that where Jonathan's argument is that it comes from a good place, but I have seen sort of the other end of it, where people are literally struggling with so many elements of life in the UK right now, and they just don't have the capacity to start feeling sorry for others, rightly or wrongly. So I humbly apologise for shouting about it, but it is a real sensitive subject, as you can probably tell.
The point is, Phil, that it's not an either-or situation. British people have been through hard times in the past. It doesn't mean that we lose our compassion for other people. Britain, there are more than enough resources to deal with this issue. In fact, at the moment, we are spending so much money on the asylum processing. Rwanda would be extortionately expensive. Rwanda's not a solution if you're thinking about money. The cost of living crisis is completely separate from the basic issue of Britain abiding by its international responsibilities to help solve this global crisis.
Not to those who are upset by it.
Mark, concluding remarks, please.
I just say that if you send people, let's say, to a place like Rwanda, the truth is, if people who arrive illegally know they're going to Rwanda, a lot of them will stop arriving. That's the point. I think it's a deterrence. And so in the long term, it does become economically viable.